Hello and welcome back to Late Fragments. I'm Chloe Fox, and in this third series, I'll be interviewing more remarkable octogenarians and some nonagenarians on the apparently verboten subjects of politics, money, sex, and religion. My first guest, Terry Waite, needs no introduction. Anyone who can cast their mind back to 1991 will remember the grace and dignity shown by the Archbishop of Canterbury's envoy upon his release from captivity in Lebanon. An expert hostage negotiator and the father of 4 young children, Waite had himself been captured by Hezbollah 5 years previously. Kept mainly in solitary confinement, he was ritually subjected to torture, mock executions, and pushed to the very edge of his own resilience. But he resolutely held on to the light. In the decades since his release, he's channeled the horror of those years into a life of generosity and purpose. A best-selling author, and now in his 85th year, he's devoted himself to humanitarian work. The co-founder and president of Hostage International, which supports families of those taken captive, he also works tirelessly with Emmaus UK to improve the lives of the country's homeless. At the end of the day, he said during our interview over Zoom, love and compassion will always win. I hope you enjoy listening. First of all, I wanted to congratulate you on your recent knighthood, still having an impact at 84.
Yeah, well, I was quite surprised to get it. I mean, I had previously been given an MBE, a CBE, and I thought that would be my last visit to the palace, but it wasn't. And I've always said when anyone receives an honour of that kind, there are usually a whole host of people who are behind it, who've enabled that to be. And I have worked for many years of my life with charities that I've set up and continued with, from which I've never taken any money. I've always believed that I should earn my money. And when I set up a charity, that any money that's given by the public to that charity goes to the purpose for which the charity was formed. And so after my investiture, instead of going to a posh restaurant in London or some other such place, I said, let's go and have a celebration with the homeless in Greenwich to let them share in this particular honour. So I invited people from the different charities and the homeless people, and we all met in this Emmaus community in South London. And I think it was one of the really nicest parties I've ever been to, because everyone was so happy, and they were all people who had, or many people there, had experienced real hardships in life and were getting through them. And many people from the different charities who were working to make this world a better place. And although they'd never met, a lot of them had never met each other before, they were really in instant communication. So it was a great occasion. So, that's how, one felt one ought to at least celebrate this honour and share it with other people who've been instrumental in enabling it to be.
You must have been particularly upset the other day to hear the former Home Secretary describe homelessness as a lifestyle choice.
Yes, I could give an example of that. I mean, I remember, I could give so many examples, but there was one lady I came across. She was a former civil servant and had a reasonably well-paying job, middle-paying job, got to her 50s and became rather seriously ill. And for a variety of reasons, then she had to leave her job. She didn't have considerable resources. She found that she was then unable to maintain the place where she was living. She went to live with friends. Of course, she could only do that for a short time. Then she had to leave and had nowhere to go. She was on the streets. What she did then, at night, she had a bus pass. She got on the in Trafalgar Square and travelled out to some suburb, Croydon or somewhere at night, and came back again and just did that journey up and down all night to try and keep warm on the bus. Now, is that a lifestyle choice? Well, that lady had no option. Now, eventually, of course, and she got back into life, and she's got back on her feet, and she's fine. Another example of two young boys who were in foster care, both with the same foster parents. At the age of whatever it was, 15 or 16, they were turned out. They had nowhere to go. They got a tent in the winter and lived on some derelict land in this tent. And right through the winter, I mean, I had a terrible time. Eventually, they heard about Emmaus. They came to us. When they came to us, can you believe it? Both these lads had trench foot. Now, trench foot, I thought, died out in World War One, but it's not so. Well, they've got back into life. Was that a lifestyle choice? And then, you know, the statement made, which is a crass statement, to take away their tents. I can see what she's saying, but you don't say that sort of thing. What you have to do is deal with the root of the problem. Why is there so much homelessness? Now, not every homeless person is a total wastrel. Admittedly, there are one or two people, and again, I've known such people, who do choose to live outside. How they manage in the winter, I simply do not know. But they are very, very, very much in the minority. Anyone who really doubts this, all I can say is go to an Emmaus community, talk to the former homeless people there, and just listen to their stories. And you'll see that it's not a lifestyle choice for them. For the vast majority, it's not at all. So, again, I think we need to deal with the root of the issue, not with the symptoms.
Am I right in thinking, Terry, that your father, at one point in his life, was homeless himself?
Yes, he was. Yes, he had he was born in a family where there was a family business, and during the Depression in the 1920s, his father's business went bankrupt. It broke down. The family put into very hard times, and he had to. He left home. He was a intelligent, and of course, his school wanted him to go for further education. Do that because there were not the finances available. And so he just left home and did what he could. He was homeless for a while. He used to tell me how he had very meager food. Eventually, he found himself he was born in Staffordshire. He was in Cheshire. And he eventually joined the police force. The Cheshire Police, was accepted, and of course spent the remainder of his career in that particular force. So he did get back on his feet. But he was marked, I think, for life by that early experience, which did so much harm to so many people. And I hadn't realized this, but I think one of the reasons why I've been, so concerned about this problem and tried to do something about it is, of course, because my father had that particular experience, and he knew what it was to be destitute. He picked himself up and he got himself back on his feet, but it was a hard job.
How did it affect you and your view of money growing up?
I suppose my view of money is, I suppose I've always been cautious and careful. I've never been one to have spend a lot of money on myself. Not that I've always had a lot of money at all, but I've never been the one to do that. My father, I suppose, because of his upbringing, always encouraged me to do something to earn my living, if you like, to earn my keep. I mean, we did have very little money in those days, and I used to do a newspaper round in the early morning, And then when I came home, I used to be up at, I think, 6 o'clock. My mother would leave some porridge for me, which I just heated up on the stove. And then I'd go out and do the paper round and get the school bus and come back in the afternoon. And as soon as I got back at 4:15, I did a quick evening paper round. And then on a Sunday morning, I did which I enjoyed. The best one was Sunday morning because we lived in a rural location, and I would go to the various farms delivering the newspapers. And always, many of them, you could sit down and have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and a cake or something, which was great. But I used to trudge around. And then Sunday evening, of course, I went to church as a chorister, but never on Sunday morning, always trudging around. But then also I worked in a market garden on Saturday. I did all sorts of odd jobs because I wanted a bicycle. And my father said, if you want a bike, yes, well, you can get one, but you have to work for it. So I saved up to buy a frame, and then my father sprayed that, and then we got and gradually put a bicycle together. And that was the beginning of freedom for me, because prior to a small village, one was very constrained. But now, miles and miles were open to me. So very often I'd go off, cycle in the Derbyshire Hills or wherever. And it opened up a whole new world for me. That's when my travels began. Apart from that, also hitchhiking. You could hitchhike quite safely in those days. So I remember hitchhiking, first of all, up to Scotland to see what Scotland was like. And then I decided on a long trip, I go to Vienna. And so I managed to hitchhike to Vienna, staying at youth hostels on the way. When I got to Vienna, I thought, oh gosh, this is such a long way. I must try and go back by train. I went to the train station to get a ticket, and I hadn't got enough money to get to Salzburg, never mind to get back to London. So I had to hitchhike all the way back through Germany and back home. But it was just, do it yourself in those days. If you wanted something, work for it and then get on with it. And it was good. It was enjoyable. I look back on good and happy days there, really. Although we had, as I say, it was quite simple. And of course, it was the days before every house had a TV. I mean, we got TV, when was it, 1953, when the coronation, like every house in Britain then, or maybe every house in Britain, got a TV for that. And it was a little 9-inch television set. And I remember sitting in that room watching the coronation with my parents. And my father saying to me, he said, watch this and never see anything like this again in your life. He was wrong, because I did see the second coronation of King Charles, but never ever those days did I ever dream that afterwards then I should, meet the royal family and become known to them.
I was going to say, what would your father have thought about you being knighted by the king?
I regret my father died relatively young, in his mid-50s. He died of lung cancer. He was very ill, and he was off work, obviously. He was home in bed. And he'd been to see the specialist, and the specialist had diagnosed that he got cancer. So but he hadn't told him any further details. So I telephoned the consultant. He said it isn't good. He hasn't got long to live. So I said, have you told him? He said, no, I haven't. I said, well, what shall I do? He said, well, it's up to you. If you want to tell him, you tell him. So I had to debate. I was quite a young man, what to do. I went back home and I thought it's best if I do tell him. So I told him that the prognosis was serious. It was unlikely that he was to live long. And that was a good thing to do, actually. It was difficult, very, very difficult. But it enabled us to have a relationship at a depth, a different level in the last months of his life, which I wouldn't have had before. I'm not saying it was totally bad before. He was a disciplinarian. He was fairly strict. But we entered into a new relationship at that point. And I think for the majority of people, not everybody, but for the majority of people, it's probably a good thing to face the possibilities of what might be, to face the truth, as far as you know it.
I did read you saying, Terry, once that you considered, as well as considering being ordained, you did also consider a monastic life and then realized quite quickly that maybe that celibacy wasn't for you.
Well, that's true. I mean, um, I think a, as far as I know myself, a sort of a mixture between being gregarious, if you like, and solitary. But as I get older, I become increasingly a solitary. And I think that's always been an aspect of my character. Um, but there was a time, and I think this is not uncommon, a period in my life when I found it almost extraordinarily difficult to bear solitude, to bear being alone. I found it very, very hard. I'm not quite sure why, but I did. But when I was in captivity, I had to spend 5 years completely alone, most of the time without books or papers, and see anybody actually at all for fun, because I was blindfolded all the time when anyone came in the room, and I was chained up. And gradually, I had to come to terms with myself. I think one of the difficult things about growing up is that you really need to be able to know yourself and know that you yourself are capable of deceiving yourself, capable of thinking you are what you're not. Um, and to be honest with yourself and to really face up to it is not an easy process. And had chance to do that in captivity. I had chance for a long period of introspection. Now, the problem with that, of course, is that when you become introspective, when you look within, inevitably you'll find the two sides of your character. You know, that one might call it the light or the dark or the good or the bad or whatever you like. But it's the two sides, negative, positive. And where you dwell, I think, excessively on the negative, you can fall into deep depression. And the answer is, in part, to try and find some balance, to recognize you're no great shakes, and you're a normal human being, nor are you totally bad. Somehow you've got to begin to find that degree of inner harmony. And I think I was able to, that's why I could look back on captivity as a benefit, if you like, or there were benefits within that experience, because it gave me opportunity for that deep reflection. And I think modern life, with its instant features about it, does not necessarily encourage introspection of that kind. And I think that's where, for example, a retreat or a retreat, if it's not a religious retreat, a retreat is a good thing to do. But again, many people can't bear it because it does take time to get into that degree of trueness and being comfortable with yourself. It isn't a process that happens overnight. And it's taken me a lifetime, and I'm still not there. I mean, I've still got a long way to go to be more comfortable, to be totally comfortable. But I think it is a lifelong process. Of I've put it, I've explained it simply in sort of three ways, really. Be at harmony with yourself, to be in harmony with your neighbour, and to be in harmony with your environment. And it seems to me that in the world today, so many people are out of harmony with themselves, out of harmony with their neighbours, and out of harmony with their environment. And if you can work for those three goals, at least it's a step in the right direction, in my view.
That time in your life must have been, I mean, I know that it was unimaginable to most of us, but it does seem that you delved extraordinarily beautifully into your own soul in some ways.
Well, just one thing before I address that point. I said the benefits of that experience. The way I had to deal with it was to learn to live for the moment, not to think too far ahead, because, one never knew whether one would live to see the end of the day. I mean, I did face a mock execution, I did have physical torture. And so one lived for the moment and said, look, now you have this moment, live it as fully as you can. Now, of course, you're constrained because there are not the aids around you, there are not the books, there's no television, there's no company, it's just yourself sitting on the floor in a dark room. But if you've been able and fortunate enough, as I was, to have a store of memory of books that I'd read, of stories that I'd heard, I could draw on that. And then I could begin to keep my mind alive by writing in my head. And so I wrote in my head. I wrote books in my head. I traveled in my head. I'm I don't like to think of myself as an over religious person because I think religion as such has so many negative connotations. But I do believe in the life of the soul as spiritual. And each morning I would save a lead and little water in a cup and Holy Communion to myself because I'd remembered all the words of that. And that, I used to say to myself as I was saying that service, this is linking you with people all around the world who are doing exactly the same thing. And I suppose that emphasizes the importance of ritual. Ritual and symbols in themselves are empty, but behind them is a wealth of meaning. And this is where so much in religion we get caught up with arguments about ritual and practice. That is not the essence. The ritual and practice are one thing, but they point to something much deeper. And what you have to do is use those symbols and get behind those symbols to that which is much deeper and which lies beyond it.
When you've been forced into a position of solitude as you were, how does kind of emotional re-entry feel back into family life and back into a life with other people?
Well, it's not easy. I mean, for the first moment, eat a meal with my family because I'd been so accustomed to being alone. And I found the emotional exchange too great. And I couldn't relate to a large number of people easily, quickly. So it took time. And again, what I've often said to and often able to say to returned hostages, don't worry about that. Just take your time. Many people have come out of situations of trauma or where they've been isolated, have come back and they've attempted to sort of pick up life and do everything, if you like, within the first couple of weeks. And it doesn't last. It collapses very often. And sometimes you just need to go back to what I was saying in captivity. Live for now, take it step by step, gradually. And that's the way to do it. That's what I tried to do. But things have changed. I mean, things change. As you get older, you change. Life changes you. Family grow up, and you need to be adapting to the changes of life all the time, slowly and creatively, and not negatively.
And Francis has been unchanging in your life. I mean, it's an extraordinary achievement to have walked beside somebody for that long. What would you say was the secret to that, to sustaining such an enduring marriage?
I don't. I think everybody has to work out their own pattern. Partly because also the work I find with other people is pretty demanding. I mean, every week I've got 3 or 4 people phoning me, former hostages, and we spend an hour on Zoom each week. People who've been imprisoned and people who are getting back into life, and then former offenders from prison and so on. And you just need time to be quiet and to be away from everything. But it works out. Again, you see, I think every married couple has to find their own pattern. And if you can do that, well, good, it works. But it's where you become force one party into your pattern, or they want to force you into their pattern, that you run into trouble. And then you say, this is not going to work, and you break up. And unfortunately, there's such a high break in marriage lives these days. It's very sad for people.
When you talk so much to people who've been through or know something of what you've been through, does that help you to heal, or does it involve reliving a trauma over and over again?
No, I don't relive the trauma. I don't. I've really had very little problem. I mean, probably the first year was I had a year. I mean, let me put it this way: I was very fortunate when I came out because I was elected to a fellowship at Trinity Hall, Cambridge, and I lived in college for the middle part of the week and went home at weekends. When that happened, some people on the outside said, "Oh, that's the beginning of the breakup. It's going to fall apart. Everything's going to be great. Not living at home. Why isn't he home 24 hours a day?" and so to speak. But it was the right thing to do. I was able in that midweek to get on with writing the book, the first book I wrote, which I've done mainly in my head, the book Taken on Trust. I wrote that on paper in Cambridge, and then went home at weekends. And that pattern worked. It was a good pattern. But it did take me about, and I'm tremendously indebted to Trinity Hall for the fellowship there, because I could write and be alone in the day, and I could meet the fellowship in the evening for a meal and for conversation, and gradually back into life. So it was really a very useful process, and I'm very grateful to them for what they enabled me to have.
Let's move on to religion. You've said that you've always tried to make sense of what religious belief that you have. How would you describe your religious belief as it stands today?
I believe that the human being is more than sum total of its physical compounds, if you like. And I think one only has to see that somebody dies, definitely something has left that body. A friend of mine is writing a book and asked me, how do you define soul? And I think it's very, very difficult to define soul, extremely difficult. I mean, the sum total of who we are. But I think someone explained it. I think it was Carl Jung who explained it in a way that soul is the route, the entry to the inner world. uh, the entry point into the inner world. And we live in the outer world and the inner. There is an inner world which is accessible through dreams and through all that the unconscious, a world of mystery, and a world which in some ways is made intelligible by symbols and by religion. I mean, the religions, great religions of the world, are attempting to interpret this inner world, and they interpret them according to their own culture. In India, it's interpreted in one way. In Christianity, it's interpreted in another way, and so on and so forth. But they're all pointing to this great mystery which lies beyond. And that's what I believe, that God is a great mystery. I was brought up in the Christian tradition. I'm happy to embrace and accept the Christian tradition as being the particular route for me to guide me towards a deeper understanding of that mystery. But I'm not a bit concerned about the various denominations, if you like, because the denominations are arguing so often, or have argued so often in the past, about the symbols and about the structures, which is not the essence. The essence lies beyond that. And that's true also of the great faiths. I think the great faiths have got their own symbols and structures according to their traditions, but they're pointing towards, again, this history. And we can't we can't fully comprehend it, because once you've got a mystery, and so you can't. There's never going to be a full comprehension, but there's going to be, if you progress along that route, there is going to be a gradual transformation of self, a gradual molding of self, if you like. Not that one will ever understand fully intellectually, but one will understand emotionally and spiritually. You can't have everything tied up. I mean, we want that. We want every dot, every I, every query answered. You can't have that, because that's not the way in which this other world works, if you like. So what will happen beyond death? I mean, I don't know. None of us know. We have our hopes, we have our ambitions, we just don't know. But we don't need to bother about that. What we need to bother about now, what we need to be worried about now, is, are we in ourselves, going back to those points, are we at least in harmony? And in harmony with ourselves, with our neighbor, with our environment. In so doing, I think that means at least we become in harmony with God, or whoever one might say is the great force and power of this very mysterious universe.
Did your deep dive into your own inner world bring you any closer to understanding the mystery, do you think?
Yes, I think so. I think it's been a gradual progression. I think it was undoubtedly beneficial to have those years of solitude. Undoubtedly beneficial. Although, having said that, I certainly was to experience again, not in that way. I'm not saying that for one moment, but I am saying that it was. I think this, about those sort of experiences, that everybody in life has some form of misfortune for them. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be, in some cases it's extremely serious, in others it's less so. But I often feel that in situations of like that kind, within the misfortune, there are often the seeds of new opportunity, if you look for them and find them. And that's been proved time and time again. And I think that's been so in my case. It was certain a blow to be captured, and a difficulty for me, not just for me, but for my wife and family, for all of us. But somehow we found the seeds within that of new opportunity, and have been able to take them and hope life, not just for ourselves, but for other people too. And I think that's important.
What keeps you going, Terry? Because you do seem to keep going. A lot of people would have their slippers on at this point in life, but you don't seem to want to do that.
You wonder why, don't you? And I wonder why sometimes. I think if I stop, I'll just seize up like an old car engine. If we don't use it, use it or lose it. So I think, sometimes I think, oh gosh, if I don't keep moving, I'm not going to be able to move around at all. And so I've got, we're recording this just before Christmas, but it is actually a very busy time now. I've got engagement of 2 or 3, 4 every week now before Christmas. And I don't regret that, but I am pacing myself. I am slowing down a bit. But I doubt that I shall ever slow down completely. And why? You asked the question why. I don't know. Perhaps it's the old compulsion, to prove oneself, to say, I'm not going to be beaten. I'm going to keep going.
Thank you for listening to Late Fragments with Terry Waite. If you'd like to find out more about the work done by either Hostage International or Emmaus UK, please follow the links in my show notes. And if you're enjoying the podcast and would like to hear more, do subscribe on your podcast app of choice or follow us on all the usual social media channels. In the next episode, I'll be talking to the 91-year-old historian Antonia Fraser. In the meantime, my thanks to Louis Fulford-Smith for the sound production and edit, and to Harry Dundas for the music and original score. Until next time, goodbye.